By the time the kitchen clock stuttered its way to 11:47, the coffee in Eleanor's cup had gone cold. The radio on the counter breathed a soft murmur. Late-night sports scores, the kind of harmless noise people leave on to keep from hearing themselves think. Across from her, Frank kept tracing the rim of his mug with a callous thumb, a slow circle wearing a darker ring into the ceramic. Between them lay the small dish where she kept her rings when she washed dishes. Tonight the dish was empty. They had started the night in regular clothes. Eleanor in the cardigan with the snagged sleeve, Frank in a work shirt he never stopped calling good, no matter how thin the elbows were. Now the edges of everything felt worn. The table scar, the curtain string, the patience of two people who had already said too much and not nearly enough. "I'm tired," Eleanor said, which was both true and not what she meant. Frank nodded, his eyes on the dish, then on the wheat-colored linoleum where the light made a small lake on the floor. "Me too." He looked like he had when she'd first met him at the summer dance, long-limbed and lost, holding his hat in both hands as if it were a question. He had stood under the string lights and asked whether she liked to two-step, as if that were the most serious business in the world. She had laughed, not because it was funny, but because she liked how careful he sounded with her name. Back then, the air smelled like cut grass and gasoline. The little American Legion Hall that hosted the dance had pumped out songs everyone knew the words to, and the breeze had full permission to wander through the doors. Eleanor wore a yellow dress and her mother's pearls, and Frank showed up in a shirt that didn't fit quite right, because who could afford a tailor at 22? Afterward, he'd walk her to her father's porch and promised he was good at fixing things that rattled. "Cars, mostly," he'd said, then added softly, "and my own mistakes." They never did have money for a tailor. They had a wedding in a church with a blue carpet and a potluck dinner in the basement hall. Eleanor's aunt brought deviled eggs, and someone switched out Frank's Budweiser for something fancier as a joke, and he nearly spit it out laughing. They drove away in a '72 Ford with a transmission that required coaxing and a tape deck that chewed up her favorite songs. The apartment smelled like hot paint and new carpet. It had one window and a view of the brick wall next door, and they used to sit on the floor sharing a bowl of sliced peaches, legs tangled, listening to a summer thunderstorm rumble like an old man clearing his throat. When the baby came, they moved to a small house with a magnolia in the front yard, and the years, once slow, began to lengthen and slump like bread that rises too far. "I don't think this is about coffee," Frank said. "No," Eleanor answered. "It isn't." They had been speaking in circles for months now. The circles were polite, Midwestern circles that try not to spill, but in their quiet way they soak through the floor. There had been no dramatic blow, no slammed door or shattered vase, but little fractures everywhere. The mortgage check that was mailed late and made her heart knock in her throat. The breakfast where he read the paper instead of hearing the words, "I don't sleep well." The time she meant to tell him the doctor sounded worried and didn't because he'd limped in from the garage with grease on his knuckles and a good story about a neighbor's mower. Years. Years filled with small, earnest failures. "You remember when the ceiling leaked?" Frank asked finally, right over the crib. Eleanor smiled despite herself. "We put the bucket in the wrong place 3 times, and I swore I could fix it myself." "You did," she said, because he had, standing on a ladder with rainwater running down his nose like a boy at a community pool. She had passed him tools while the baby washed wide-eyed from a laundry basket beside the sink. They had felt young then, the kind of invincible that comes when the problem is hard but clear and you're certain you love the person holding the other end of the ladder. If someone had told that girl with the laundry basket that someday she'd sit in the same kitchen debating whether love was a thing you protect or a thing you release, she would have laughed like a bell. That girl believed in the fix for everything. Eleanor took a breath. "Frank, I don't know how to say this the right way." "You never needed the right way," he said, with a tenderness that made the room tilt. "Just say it." She looked at his hands. There was motor oil that never fully left the skin, no matter how many times you scrubbed. There were stories in those hands, the porch repairs and timing belts and Christmas bicycles that he assembled by lamplight. She wanted to thank those hands for decades of trying. "I feel like we turn into good roommates," she said. "The kind that know who likes wheat bread and who puts the spoon's handle up in the dishwasher. But I keep waiting for us to be us again." and the waiting is swallowing me. Frank did not flinch. He was good at not flinching, at celebrating small wins on bad days, at nodding through other people's judgments. He had learned that in the factory, where a man's worth could be miscounted by someone who had never met him. "I know," he said. "I've known." The clock clucked once. Down the block, a dog barked its opinion of the night, then apologized to no one. Across from Eleanor, the man she married turned his cup so the handle faced the sink and then turned it again, uncertain where it belonged. Eleanor remembers another kitchen, another late night, 1986, the year the plant cut shifts and they learned new math for groceries. She had whispered numbers into a notebook while Frank practiced the speech he would give his supervisor about fairness, dignity, a steady paycheck. He came home that day with a stiff spine and a short future there, and she had loved him so fiercely it startled her, because it felt like belief, not fear. They had been good at crises. It was the long, flat places, the years when everyone was fine and the roofs didn't leak and their daughter asked for the 1,000th ride of practice, that filed them down. Routine is a soft river, and stones do not notice they're smaller until there is nothing sharp left to catch the light. "I saw you reading those letters again," Frank said, not accusing so much as naming a weather pattern. Eleanor flushed. The letters weren't love letters. They were simple pages from a summer friend, written decades ago when she had taken a secretarial job at the camp near the lake. They were full of nonsense, canoe races and burnt pancakes, and a joke about the director's hat. But the handwriting dragged up a different version of her, one who took long walks and let the evenings go as slow as they wanted. She kept those letters not because of the man who wrote them. She could barely call up his face now, but because they reminded her of being looser, less curated. "They make me remember," she said. "Me too," he answered, and she realized with shock that he knew the feeling, that his remembering wore a different shirt but fit just as well. "What do you remember?" she asked. He tipped his head toward the garage. A cricket stuck behind a toolbox. The smell of cedar from a church on Christmas Eve. You, swearing at a jar you couldn't open and then laughing so hard you had to sit down. Back when I thought, I'll spend my whole life making that sound happen. He folded his hands and looked at them. "I don't know when I lost track." Eleanor could almost hear the decades. A paper calendar flipped too fast, the pages whispering by. Somewhere in there, they had stopped telling each other the small, unpretty truths. Somewhere in there, she had become the person who apologized for crying, and he had become the man who had an answer ready before he heard the question. Somewhere in their love, unwatered, had not died so much as curled in on itself, conserving. "Do you want to try?" she asked, the words a tremor. "Really try?" Frank's silence was not empty. It was full of inventories. Her doctor's appointment she canceled, the grandkids who needed rides next week, the way the oak by the mailbox leaned after the last storm, the new ache in his left hip that was either nothing or the first sign of something big. He was 69 now, a man on the far side of most plans. The thought of tearing the house down to the studs and rebuilding made him tired, and ashamed of the tiredness. "I want to," he said. "Some days I do. And other days it feels like chasing a train we missed back in '93. It should have made her angry. Instead, she felt the terrible relief of hearing what her bones already knew. They didn't speak for a while. The fridge kicked on and off. Somewhere 2 streets over, a teenager revved an engine as if power lived in the noise. Frank's eyes traced the grain of the table. Eleanor watched the condensation circle on his mug dry into nothing. "You remember when Wayne almost moved to Tampa?" he asked out of nowhere, naming their old neighbor who threatened Florida every winter and never left. He said, "I want a fresh start where my knees don't complain." He meant the humidity, but I always heard the part about the fresh start. Eleanor nodded. They had believed in fresh starts for other people, a girl running from a bad marriage, a boy quitting a dangerous habit, a widower finding someone kind. Somehow, they had not applied the same math to themselves, as if longevity were a kind of virtue you weren't allowed to question aloud. He looked up, finally. His eyes were clear. "I don't think staying makes us brave. I don't think leaving makes us cowards." She waited for the ache to rise, but what came was thinner and less nameable. An opening, a hallway she hadn't seen. "I could pack a bag," he said softly. "Stay at the motel on 9 for a while. See our daughter more. Help with the boys' little league. You keep the house. It's always been yours to me." We call a lawyer who still uses a paper calendar and writes too hard with his pen. We do it without burning down what's left. The clock turned 12:02 as if it had been stretching for that small new number all night. Eleanor stared at the empty ring dish. She had removed her ring that afternoon to scrub the sink with a paste of baking soda and lemon. It was funny the way hands keep moving through these moments. One small task, then another, because the body is loyal even when the heart stumbles. She had meant to put the ring back on. She had not. When her son broke his arm in 9th grade, she had sat in the ER hallway with the smell of antiseptic and rubber gloves in fear. She had watched Frank do the thing he wasn't taught to do. Hold coup promise. She had wanted to stand up then and tell the waiting room, "Look, this man, this is what love looks like." She thought of that now and let herself smile instead of flinch. "Okay," she said. The word was a plank laid across a cold stream. Plain. Weight-bearing. Okay. They did not rush. They made lists. Frank found the box with the motel's number and the old map they kept for no good reason. Eleanor wrote, "Call Ruth Tuesday and cancel lawn service and find the good casserole dish," as if the logistics were a handrail. They spoke in gentle voices, which felt truer than anything else they could have done. At 1 in the morning, he stood up. The kitchen chair made a sound that belonged to 100 holiday dinners and 200 ordinary Tuesdays, and once. One fight where he left and came back before dawn with bread still warm from the bakery. He set his cup in the sink and turned on the faucet, then turned it off, remembering that running water at night woke the pipes into banging and the pipes woke the whole house. "I'll come by tomorrow," he said, "and we'll figure out the rest." Eleanor stood, too. She wanted to say something noble and movie-worthy. Instead, she did what she'd done on their wedding day. When he couldn't find the words during the vows, she reached for his hand and squeezed once, a small signal that said, "I know who you are." At the door, he looked back at the photograph in the frame on the counter. The one of them in front of the church with the confetti of rice in her hair and his tie slightly off because he'd hugged everyone too hard. "We did a lot right," he said. "We did," she answered. The door closed. It wasn't a slam, wasn't a statement. It was a door doing what a door does, and the house did not fall. The night poured itself into the room. Eleanor stood there for a long time, listening to the gentle machinery of her own breath. She washed the 2 cups, slow circles with the sponge, set them in the rack to dry. She put the ring back in the dish, not as a ceremony, but as a kindness to the morning. In bed, the space beside her felt unfamiliar in the way a room does when the furniture is moved an inch. Not empty exactly, reshaped. She watched the squares of streetlight work their way across the ceiling. In her mind, she walked through a map of their ordinary years. The PDA booths and the gas station coffee, the sprinkler turning in the yard, the way Frank whistled without noticing he was doing it. She thought of the girl at the summer dance. She thought of the woman she had been later, the mother, the budgeter, the keeper of appointments and birthdays, the one who remembered who liked the corner brownie pieces. In the morning, she would call Ruth, who would bring muffins too sweet for breakfast and a magazine with too many perfumes in it. In the afternoon, she would take down the curtains to wash them, and the house would look odd and clean without them. Soon enough, she would schedule the first appointment with the lawyer who wrote too hard. She would ask their daughter to look over the paperwork. Some things would be easier than expected. Others would take the skin off her palms. For now, the house was quiet. The quiet was not her enemy. It was a thing to set a cup down in, to listen for the small, brave sound she had ignored for years. She let herself feel the ache and the hope at the same time, the way one can hold ice in one hand and a warm mug in the other, and be fully present to both. Down the block, someone's wind chime rang once like a question. Eleanor answered aloud, though no one was there. "We tried," she said. "We did our best with the tools we had." She slept. In the morning, the ring dish looked merely like a dish. The sun came in strong, lighting the dust motes. Eleanor made fresh coffee and buttered toast to the edges. The kitchen smelled like a small, brave life. She stood at the sink and watched the magnolia read the day. Out near the mailbox, the oak still leaned from the last storm. She wrote a note to call someone to check it. Later, she would go into the garage and open the toolbox they had been sharing for 41 years, and she would pick up the tape measure and learn the weight of it in her hand all over again. On the table, beside the grocery list, she began a different kind of list. Teach the grandboys to make their grandfather's chili. Find a cassette with the laughter on it. Forgive herself for the hungry parts that woke up late. Learn which nights hurt and which ones healed, and that both kinds were a form of living. At 9, the radio gave the weather for the week, and she smiled because the forecast was wrong in that gentle way it often is. She took the curtains down. She hummed the tune of something old and comforting, a song that once played in a hall with a blue carpet and a window wide to the summer. She felt the ache and the relief and the unsteady space where a new beginning might stand if invited. At noon, the doorbell rang, and she knew it would be Ruth. She also knew that by evening she would be alone again, and that she would be all right. Not immediately and not perfectly, but fully in the way a person can be when they choose to tell themselves the truth. That night, when the clock stuttered toward 11:47 again, she did not make coffee. She made tea. She turned off the radio and listened to the house learn her voice. In the drawer lay the map Frank had left. She did not need it yet. It comforted her to know where it was. The magnolia by the front walk held its shape under the porch light, steady as a hand. What do you think? When two people have shared decades and memories thick as bread, is it better to hold on for the sake of the past, or to let go and begin again, even when fewer years lie ahead than behind? Share your thoughts in the comments.